as you can see from the title slide and from the abstract I gave, the focus of my presentation today is fatherhood and how our fathering practices transmitted across generations. So we'll be talking about fatherhood practices being transmitted and, as a consequence, also changes in fatherhood in the broader societal milieu. So I've mentioned the word intergenerational transmission, and I'm going to start with a brief overview of what it entails. And Julia Brennan tells us transmission covers a variety of phenomena, including assets, values, political beliefs, social mobility, and social status, citing Bengtson and colleagues. Important also are the moral and emotional bonds forged between generations, and citing Berto and Thompson, 1997. We'll be discussing mainly values and also emotional bonds. And the way fathers transmit these, broadly speaking, we can say that they are guided by two sets of normative demands. And they are the older, or what we call the older or traditional norms, and the newer, modern, sometimes also referred to as contemporary norms. To define them, I draw on two seminal works, that by Connell in relation to older norms. So Connell wrote her seminal work was on masculinities and defined hegemonic masculinity as a type of masculinity which encourages male dominance of women, and in part that is done through headship of families and through being the primary provider, the primary breadwinner. In relation to fathering, it entails paternal power being affirmed through aggression, authoritarianism, and there's a lack of emotional expression and a lack of emotional literacy as well. By contrast, involved fatherhood, and there are many scholars who have written about it, Dermot, Eliot, Marsilio, to name but a few, but I drew on the seminal definition by Michael Lamb because he laid the groundwork for involved fatherhood, and Lamb tells us that the new modern norms involve accessibility, engagement with children, responsibility and a care ethic, and implicit in those is warmth and emotional literacy. Now, although they have been presented in contrasting terms, and indeed this is or might be a struggle for men, for fathers, it does not mean that they are mutually exclusive. And so much so that in a contemporary context, fathers are expected to embrace both sets of norms. This is by no means an easy task, and Alexandra Macht and Petz and colleagues respectively refer to the difficulty or the struggle involved in navigating these two sets of norms, so the older and the newer. Now, this struggle is sharpened and intensified for separated fathers because they tend to be absent in the sense of becoming a non-resident father, so absent from the home most of the time. Mothers become the trustees of their care and love for their children, and mothers also become the trustees of their maintenance monies. And fathers also choose to continue the provider role via transmission of maintenance monies, or they can desist. And therefore, their breadwinning role or provider role or lack of becomes sharpened and intensified. Their choice is made much more evident. Now, an important point to note, and I will return to this quite a number of times in the presentation, is that child-oriented parenting is not the same as gender-equal parenting. So sometimes implicitly we assume that involved fathers are gender equal and have an egalitarian attitude, and that's not necessarily the case in relation to their partners. And this is one of the fundamental problems for shared parenting. which fathers don't realize. So they might think if I'm caring with my child, and that's enough, and not pay enough attention to the horizontal relationship. And I'm going to start this discussion with a quote by Barack Obama. He gave a lot of quotes about fatherhood. I chose this one because it's pertinent to this topic. And he said, someone once said that every man is trying to live up to his father's expectations or trying to make up for his father's mistakes. And this is what we're going to talk about. Are they going to choose to be similar? They're going to choose to be different? Or trying to blend the two, to reconstruct the two. And so this is what we're going to discuss. And I'm going to start with some, before presenting my study, I'm going to start with some key findings from Accent study. So I draw on a small body of literature by Julia Brennan and colleagues and Alexandra Maht. And they interviewed, interestingly, they were both multicultural studies. So Brennan explored the values of British and Polish fathers, and Maht Romanian and Scottish fathers. And they both, so these are the first 4 bullet points are what's common to both studies. So they highlighted how fatherhood is an active process. It's not passive. It's very personal. They craft out their own fathering practice and their own norms and their own ways of being with their children. They both found, and that's why the points are in bold, more discontinuity than continuity, and a new emphasis on child orientation. And this is also what I found. So by more discontinuity, they mean I want to be different from my father. His father said, I want to be a different kind of father to my children. And also, they both found that they both discussed really well how fathering practices are embedded in relationships and in the cultural milieu. So, for example, Brennan talked about migrants and the difference between generations of migrants. Maht highlighted differences between Romanian and Scottish fathers. But also, and this is crucial to my study and my points, their relationships. So the partner, whether it's a wife or a cohabitating relationship, is fundamental in terms of aiding that relationship or not, gate opening or gate closing in the case of separated fathers. And they gave examples. For example, Brennan gave an example of a hands-on father who was a stay-at-home father, and his partner was the breadwinner. So that shows and therefore helped him in this role. And that shows both the relationship and also cultural changes, women being gainfully employed in the labor market and so on. So relationships and the cultural setup is crucial. Also horizontal relationships with their peers in terms of peer influence and so on. Now Maht highlighted some specific, there are some specific points that I would like to raise from her findings. So she highlighted very well, it's not either the old or the new, but a kind of shift or dance between those two. And she used the concept of emotional bordering to show how they were caring towards their children, sure, but they took measures to maintain closeness or sometimes distance with their children. So in some cases they demonstrated the newer form, in some others stoicism, the older form of masculinity. So even with the fathers who identify as different, as the newer dad, there is this kind of dance between the two. And 2 very important points. Fathers, although with their children, this relates to the earlier point, that it's not necessarily gender equal. Although they express this caring ethic in relation to their children, they showed expression of Stoic beliefs, traditional, in relation to their partners. So it's not necessarily that the way they relate to their children is indicative of a gender equal and egalitarian relationship horizontally with their partners. She had a small subgroup of single fathers, and there were narratives of worrying for children's well-being. This also came out in my study. And that is the influence of there being non-resident. Those were some important points that emanated from these studies. So now I turn to my PhD study, which focused on single fathers living in Malta. And before that, I'm just going to go a quick run through some germane features of our societal context in Malta. So in terms of separation and divorce, we have the lowest divorce rate in Europe. Accrued rate is 0.9, around 300 divorces per year. And around 3% of households in Malta are headed by a lone parent. But that's an underestimate because it rules out those who are living with their families of origin. Our fertility rate is the lowest in Europe at 1.08. And why is this important to this presentation? Obviously, fertility rate it's a multifactorial, a multi-pronged social phenomenon. Yesterday, Dr. Edgington was talking about those who choose not to have children, for example, out of fear of what their children will face. But another facet is father involvement. So the more father involvement there is socially, that will help boost the fertility rate. Tanturi wrote about this, Esther Fanelli, and others. And finally, in relation to egalitarianism, we have made a lot of progress. Female employment rate, now at 71%, is actually slightly higher than that in the EU. But there are still gendered practices. So women engage in more care work and house chores in Malta. And overall, our gender earnings gap, the overall one, stood at 39.4%, which is slightly above the EU average. And those have ramifications as barriers to shared parenting. On the one hand, relationships are not egalitarian in terms of cooking, house chores, child rearing, caring. On the other hand, because of this gender pay gap, that points towards the need for maintenance monies, at least for now. So, and that has ramifications, therefore, for separated parents. I won't spend too long about this, but because I've interviewed separated fathers, a quick look at how Maltese courts determine custody arrangements when there's no agreement. So basically, the court is entrusted with looking at best interests of the children, so it gives directions as it deems appropriate. And although Maltese law is not inherently biased in favor of mothers, it's written in such a way that gendered care is still written into it, in the sense that it mentions the payer and the payee, and it does not start from a presumptive shared parenting approach. And judges, and this is both expert opinion, Dr. Robert Take, and also two legal studies by law students, basically confirm this, that sole legal custody and also sole physical custody tend to be awarded to mothers. And there is a reluctance to consider joint physical custody or equal shared parenting due to judiciary's belief that commuting between two homes leads to a lack of stability for children. And this is in line with most of the Western developed world. Cook and Skinner wrote about this, feminist scholars wrote about this. And unfortunately, it has the state of buttressing, it has the effect of buttressing the status quo. So, and generations of children of separated parents, remain entrenched with the idea that mom is the carer and dad is the breadwinner. So a quick overview of the study. It explored fathers' perceptions and experiences of post-separation. A special focus was accorded to child maintenance, but also child access. And one of the research sub-questions, sub-question C, focused, which is what I'll be focusing on today, focused on fathers' views on fathering norms and their expectations around children's care. So I'm drawing mostly from that. Semi-structured interviews were held with 31 fathers who had separated under Maltese law within the last 10 years. Framework analysis was used to analyze data, and it was underpinned by a critical realist relational perspective. I think the author, Pier Paolo Donati, was, if I recall well, was one of the speakers at one of the previous ICCFR conferences. And the critical realist perspective basically is important because it gives importance to agency, so father's agency and mother's agency, relationships as structures which affect the partners, and also social structures like our justice system, the judiciary, the workings of social negotiation theory, the workings of lawyers and mediators, and the effect that has on relationships and on individual agency as well. And within that overarching framework, I referred also, and I'm going to refer to this to talk about the findings, contextual therapy, which is Bozormeni Nagi's theory. It involves basically he talked about 4 interlinking dimensions. He later added, or rather it was his widow who published about it, the 5th dimension, which is the ontic, the need for relationships. But it's implicit in these 4, so I haven't included it. And basically he referred to facts like demographics, for example, psychology, the partner's cognitive and emotional makeup, how they interpret events and so on, systemic transactions, power, communication, and relational ethics, which is basically the sense of fairness or unfairness in relation to give and take. So thinking about my obligations and commitments and how fair is it, when I think about what I'm giving and what I'm getting back. It is by implication an intergenerational theory, and Hargrave and Pfizer talked about these dimensions interacting among generations as a megaphone. They use this word megaphone. Now, basically, an important concept of relational ethics is the 2 dimensions. So there's the vertical, how we were brought up, and there is the scale, so you can score it. It's a questionnaire, it's a survey. So you could, that would include statements like, I could trust my family to seek my best interest, or conversely, at times I was used by my family unfairly, or I felt my life was dominated by parents' desires. And examples from the horizontal subscale relate to our relationships with partners. So I try to meet the emotional needs of my spouse, or my spouse stands beside me in times of trouble or joy. He or she is there for me. Or conversely, I'm taken for granted or used unfairly. And these subscales are important because the vertical can affect the horizontal, sorry. And there is empirical evidence for this. So research by Grimes and colleagues in 2008, and I believe later on also there was Gray literature, a PhD thesis by Gamma. They found empirical evidence for this. So the total score of the relational ethics scale, so horizontal and vertical, predicted marital satisfaction, or in Gamma's case it was couple. So whether you're married or a couple, a cohabiting couple, does not make a difference. And horizontal and vertical subscales each correlated with marital satisfaction as well. So I'm now coming to a critique, and this is important because it links to the fundamental arguments in post-separation arrangements. So I'm going to use the critique by Fowers and Wenger, and basically they critique the theory, relational ethics. It's a very clear critique. It focuses on the subjective. So I feel a sense of unfairness. I judge it according to my criteria. How about how I relate to my partner? How do I treat my partner fairly? There can be a tendency just to focus on the self from a selfish point of view, from a self-serving point of view. And this can be evident in post-separation arguments over children's best interests. What are children's best interests? Is it shared parenting? Is it maintenance monies? So just to give an example, for example, fathers can concentrate on what they lack and access, and without thinking about, for example, lone mothers' need for maintenance money, the gender pay gap. Conversely, for mothers, it could be the other way around. And Fowers and Wenger, in a very well-written critique, pointed to the need for a broader approach to the good, a different hermeneutic style, where we don't focus on just the subjective, although that is important, but how can we reconcile different ideas of good, how can we resolve issues relating to different ideals of good, and also within a societal milieu. So they placed the onus on social policy makers to set the right context for families to resolve their dilemmas. So they said, is it fair that we lump these ethical dilemmas on families without setting the scene really well, without giving them good guidance, good guiding lines to follow, basically. And I will come to this in the latter part of the presentation on policy implications. A very quick overview of participant life circumstances. The majority were Maltese. Age ranged from 30 to 34 to 55 to 59. The majority had one child. The majority also had one past relationship involving children. 6 were currently living with a new partner or remarried. Only 1 had a child from the new relationship. All bar 3 fathers had access to non-resident children under 18, and all bar 3 reported paying formal child maintenance at time of study, but most had, I will come to this, difficulties, or they dissented to it. So I'm coming to it now. So because of the need, and this is in response to Weaver's recommendation that policymakers listen to the voices of all targets of policy, which in this case is child maintenance, father's obligations, the need was felt to explore broadly contrasting views towards child maintenance, those who were more in favor and those against. So I came up with a classification of consenting and dissenting pairs. The consenting did not express reticence to pay, had reportedly always been compliant with their formal obligations, whereas the dissenting expressed reticence to pay on a number of different grounds and had past or present difficulties with compliance. And they could include court cases or court applications or not having paid at some point or issues like that. Just as I won't dwell on it, but one of the research sub-questions related to finance, the dissenting pairs reported more financial hardship as a general rule. But I'm not going into it today because the focus is on relational and normative, and also because money was never the main driver of dissent. So none of the fathers told me it's just about money or I can't pay. The main accounting for dissent took place on the grounds of hostile relationships and also norms, which I'll talk about. So in relation to views on active fathering, fathers across both groups talked about involved fathering. It was important to all of them. The majority were dissatisfied with current access levels. Mainly it was the dissenting pairs. And they talked about how it affected their fathering emotionally. I can't, what Morgan talked about, doing families, rituals. I can't do the normal things parents do at home with my children, but also practical. I can't take my son to a 4-day football course because I only see my son on Tuesday and Thursday. But mostly it was about the emotional. And they viewed active fathering as being thwarted by all levels of the justice system. So it wasn't the judiciary, it was also mediators and lawyers. And they felt that not just the a priori position was not shared parenting, but also felt that they were forced or they tried to coerce them to compromise along the lines of gendered assumptions, or they tried to coerce them to bargain access for maintenance monies. And basically, the majority wanted, even the consenting payers, a minority of them wanted, they said in better circumstances, in more ideal circumstances, we wanted equal shared parenting. So the majority across both groups were in favor of joint physical custody. And because they viewed fathering as thwarted by perceived maternal gatekeeping, but also by the justice system, and they did not therefore view either mothers or the justice system as adequate trustees of their relationship with their children. Now, these are broad differences between consenting and dissenting pairs. The consenting pairs generally presented themselves as managing they kind of straddled both sets of norms well. They had collaborative co-parenting relationships. Some were friendly, but only a minority, but most were business-like. Some had improved with time. They tended to be happy with access, and they gave a positive appraisal of how their ex-partners executed their mothering role. Dissenting pairs generally had poor co-parenting relationships marked by conflict, and they renounced the maintenance monies on the basis of equal shared parenting or skepticism in relation to their ex's caring abilities or trusteeship of maintenance monies. Now I'm going to talk a bit about the last bit. So, because from a feminist standpoint theory, it is problematic. So arguments could be raised that these fathers wanted shared parenting, perhaps because they were violent or abusive and they wanted to bypass access problems, or they don't want to transfer monies, and that was the real reason. Now, in relation to the first, obviously the policy antidote to that would be having which we still don't have, very clear guidelines in which shared parenting is not acceded to if there is violence or abuse. But in relation to the transfer of maintenance monies, there is also a policy antidote, and that is having a system where you have shared parenting, but as in some countries, there is still some transfer of maintenance monies from the higher to the lower earner if needed, if there is a substantial discrepancy in their capital or their earning capacity and so on. However, there are also counter-arguments because there were some dissenting pairs who actually wanted, they kind of bargained, they paid a lower amount of maintenance, hoping to get equal shared parenting, and they did not succeed. As I said, even some consenting pairs who wanted to pay believed in equal shared parenting, so it's not always an excuse about money, and some were fighting for sole physical custody on the grounds that their ex-partners had drug or mental health issues. So those are counter-arguments that it's not just about the money. But in any case, the money problem could be fixed from a policy perspective in terms of having a model where if the judiciary decides that, which I believe is the best in terms of social justice, if there's a discrepancy, they order shared parenting, but they would still order transfer of maintenance monies. So in terms of how they reconstructed their father's norms, consenting and dissenting pairs both demonstrated this move from absence and stoicism towards presence and emotional literacy. So, and also they in their narratives, they gave accounts of a move away from authoritarian parenting style towards an authoritative parenting style. The difference was in terms of obviously consenting pairs accepted the breadwinner role and they viewed it as important for children to invest in children, whereas dissenting pairs rejected the traditional breadwinning role. As I said, they viewed shared parenting as morally superior to provision and they rejected the transfer of maintenance monies. They said, I want to provide directly, and she provides directly, and then we split health and education. But they did not want transfer of maintenance monies. So how did their accounts show that they valued paternal presence? So these are some quotes from both consenting and dissenting pairs. Tom and George on the left, George actually says, at the time we weren't brought up, ma konniex imrobbin, he said in Maltese, because my father, I wouldn't see him. And Tom said, I almost never saw my father, he was always at work. And he was very unhappy about the fact that this was replicated with his child. He could not have enough time to dedicate. Gary highlighted the good memories, holidays, and good times, and he said so that was a model for him, what he should do with his child. And Simon said, when we had children, I said, I cannot, my children's upbringing has to be different from the one I had. My father never took us to play football. If we went for training, he didn't come to watch us. In my case, he said, with pride, training and matches, I don't miss a match, I don't miss anything. Emotional literacy and authoritative parenting also came up as a theme. Carl identified as a newer norm kind of dad. I'm a bit caring, perhaps too caring, he says. I pay attention to everything, what he's doing, how he's feeling, whether he's feeling sad, I talk to him. And he identified with his father. He said, my father was also very caring as my mom. And he remained so, even when he was married. He would call him, do you need anything? Do you want me to come and help you? The bond remained, he said. And he gave other examples of how that bond remained. So that was an example of a similarity. And these were fathers with, again, from both consenting and dissenting groups, who recounted negative experiences of authoritarian fathers. And by the way, they were very critical of their fathers, as opposed, Brennan said they took care not to criticize their fathers. In this case, they were highly critical. So Omar had an authoritarian father. He used to physically punish him. He said, this week I watched Frozen with tears in my eyes. And my daughter laughed as she saw tears streaming down my face. And for him, that was kind of an endearing experience. What's interesting is, the daughter had already picked up gendered assumptions. I mean, in terms of laughing, she would have picked up that sort of crying is not daddy's, it's not supposed to be something daddy does. And Jason and Alfred talked about discipline, how they try to be different, talk more, understand more, reason things out more. Exploring, reflected, and they talked about also their children guiding them in their decision making, sort of following the lead of the child. Alfred also, he mentioned those words, it's like I am more emotionally literate, he said, and he also talked about spotting his mistakes and reparation, so saying sorry and repairing the relationship when things go bad. And in terms of attitudes towards financial provision, as such, only one father explicitly compared or contrasted himself to his dad. He contrasted himself. I grew up with a father who didn't care. He didn't give my mom anything. And that's why he insisted on maintenance. And I didn't want to be that way. I wanted to make sure I always did the right thing for my little child. But he, despite being a consenting pair, he is one of those who said, in an ideal case, I want 50-50 shared parenting, because he wanted to bring his child up better in his view. And Christian was the same. So he said, when I asked him, why did you pay maintenance? He had a hostile relationship with his ex, but he still trusted her with money. This was interesting. And he said, I need to provide for my child. My paternity feelings force me to do something. But again, he wanted shared care. He was fighting for it. He said, money cannot buy love or care, and I don't feel I'm taking care of my child as I should. So back to Obama's quote, and he used the word trying. It is obviously an attempt to be similar to my dad. It's an attempt to be different to my dad. So who succeeds and what helps them? So I'm going back, taking a step back to Macht's study, because both similarity and difference are active work. So similarity is not easy, and you can fail. So both Brennan and Macht gave examples. For example, one father had a very caring father, but he had he was a professional with an hour intensive job, and he felt he could not care for his, so whether you're still in an intact relationship or separated, you can fail in similarity. And Macht also shows how fathers can fail in being different. So she had a group of fathers she termed ambivalent. They tried to be different, or they identified as different, but they kind of on occasions relapsed to their father's authoritarian attitude. And she spoke of that as being an attempt, an unconscious attempt to identify with the father some sort of loyalty from a relational ethics perspective. That's my interpretation. So who succeeds and what helps them? So there are, obviously takes us down the route of resilience, and I don't want to go down that rabbit hole because we could stay all day, but I'm just going to share some ideas of what helped or what hindered. So dissenting pairs as a group had more negative vertical relational ethics. So these were their words. They said either I grew up in a patriarchal environment, harsh discipline and authority. In some cases it was the father, in some cases it was the mother, or both. Being treated unfairly could be in relation to siblings or generally. And experiences of being scapegoated, the black sheep of the family, and so on. So that it obviously has an effect, both in relation to their children and in relation to how they possibly could have related in their relationship with their partner. Now, so one of the things that this can do is, from a relational ethics perspective, you can replicate it out of loyalty to that pattern. And this brings us to the issue of ingrained patterns. So Brennan and colleagues said transmission is embedded in routine practices and relationships, and so may not be recognized as such. And you can do it subliminally or unconsciously. And one of the fathers said just that. Alfred said in our conversation, I was never the type of person to say that I don't want to do to my child what my parents did to me. Although in a previous quote, that's what he was, trying to do. Because I think deep down those things are so much part of you that you yourself don't even know that you're doing them. So, yes, he had a lot of insight. He was one of the most insightful. Now, one of the things that can help is, and that those in the consenting group who had negative experiences of their father, one of the things that helped them in their resilience was they had another person. In Mark's case, it was the mother as a model. In another case, it was a psychologist, sessions with a psychologist. So Mark had a really warm and friendly relationship with his son. He talked proudly, and he showed me pictures how he was supporting him, both in terms of education and sports. His son had a lot of sporting prowess, and like the father, like Mark, and they participated in sport events internationally together. And he contrasted that with his childhood. He described his father as selfish, never acknowledging his work, never helping him with schoolwork, and so on. And this was one of the kind of vignettes. He mentioned a lot of examples. I chose this one. So he was expelled from school one day, and as he was walking to his home, he passed his dad's shop. And his dad told him, where are you going? I said, I've been expelled from school, Dad. He said, that's a stroke of good luck. Go get changed and come help me. Ħabbat tajjeb, he said in Maltese. Can you imagine his wild selfishness? In Maltese, he said, kellu egoizmu sfrenat. And his mother told him, don't worry, I will sort it out. She went to school and she told the headmaster, I think she took him with her. She told him, just give him whatever punishment you deem fit, but I want my son at school. I don't want my son to miss out on school. And he had an instinctive sense as a young boy that the right thing to do was the mother's guideline, and he used that as a moral guide as to how to support children's school. So that's in relation to the vertical, but dissenting pairs also had more negative horizontal relational ethics. And consenting pairs usually had unicausal factors why they split up. It could be, for example, the ex's unfaithfulness. But it tended to be just kind of one issue. They somehow got over it for the sake of the children. Dissenting pairs had much more complex relationship histories. And their narratives were typically marked by two or more of these common emergent themes. So they had financial difficulties or conflict over money, and in some cases it was the mothers stealing money from the father or having a lot of debts. So that's why the fathers didn't want to trust them with maintenance monies. In other cases, they had challenges, interestingly, with work-life interface. They had squabbles over whether the mother should go to work, at what time, should it be part or full-time, how are we going to manage. And that's from an egalitarian point of view, it's very interesting. So could the fathers have been stoic there or resisted that egalitarianism, for example? Mother's mental health or addiction difficulties and perceived enmeshment of the mother with her family, and mother's infidelity. And the question is, this brings the question, to what degree are fathers and mothers reflexive about their part in horizontal relational ethics? I would answer that by saying sort of the fathers were to a degree. So they talked about taking relationship for granted. They talked about not seeing their partner. They used this word. But perhaps not to the fullest extent possible in terms of how do you explain that maternal gate closing? This is therefore important. So do they see their part if they lacked egalitarianism? Or conversely, if reportedly the mother stole money, does she see her part in that and why the father doesn't trust her with maintenance monies? I'm just giving examples. These are obviously reports. But I'm just using some examples as to how that applies. Basically, I'm going to give some examples of how the horizontal and vertical relationships intertwine in the case of Reuben. So basically, this was, again, I was constrained in terms of using only my researcher hat, so I couldn't take the role of therapist. I couldn't confront or challenge them. There were limits to how much I probed. And obviously, I just got their account, not their exes. But Reuben described a family where there was, to say that he was not supported is an understatement. So he said, I have to do everything on my own. I never found any help. Okay, yes, I'm coming to you. Basically, his father, he had to protect his mother from his father. He talked about having grown up fast, developed a thick skin. His father was smug when he told him about his separation and told him sort of history repeats itself, which he was very unhappy about. He reported having been excluded from parenting pre-separation, even she wouldn't allow him to take the daughter out, for example, to the park. And he accounted for that in terms of her father being mocked, humiliated in front of the family. Obviously, that was his accounting for it. But sort of one of the things I want to raise is how his upbringing, without him knowing perhaps, might have impacted on his relationship. So we know, for example, from research by Halford that where sons observe violence or fear, the couple exhibits more negative communication patterns, even if there's no violence. So, and to what extent could he have been aware? Even financially, because he acknowledged that the first maintenance amount he offered her was too low. He had a lot of financial constraints. How did she see that in terms of him not supporting his son financially, for example? And he was basically in quite a bad place. He was attending therapy, and he found it difficult and painful to acknowledge that the daughter was not enthusiastic about time spent with him. So he was trying to be different, but he felt that the relationship was a spoke in the wheel, and the question is to what extent what kind of things he did, or what kind of things she did that brought that along. So basically the fundamental point is that both previous research and my PhD study showed that vertical and horizontal relationships and the society and cultural milieu are important for understanding fathering practices. So the very last slides focus on what kind of implications for policy and practice. There are basically, whether you talk to mothers, to fathers, but more to mothers and lawyers, these are the 4 main barriers to shared parenting. Intimate partner violence, so the antidote to that would be, besides the violence strategy, giving clear guidelines to the judiciary, obviously, against shared parenting in that scenario. What I want to highlight is the other 3, concerns over care, a lack of gender equal parenting, and mothers' shifts at work, at home, and the mental work that they have to do. What time does my son need a haircut, or I have a party to plan next week, and can I trust the father to do those kinds of things? Could be the other way around, obviously, but more typically mothers. And the need for maintenance monies. And in short, basically, so we have to focus on what is presenting, what is preventing these transformations. And Brennan parenting egalitarianism. So it continues to policies, family law, and so on, continuing to affirm childcare as mother's responsibility. And family law reform, even in other countries, unfortunately, tends to focus on technical fixes rather than processes which strengthen parents' locus of control. So that is what we have to focus on. So basically, we have made progress in relation to equal shared parenting, and I have been entrusted by Positive Parenting to deliver training to professionals, legal professionals and helping professionals. But the attitude of the professional remains key. So we need to embed it in law, and move towards a priori presumptive shared parenting. And also signposting parents to programs for parents with high conflict is particularly important. So across all stages of the life cycle. So our department is doing great work in the perinatal arena, for example, with fathers and mothers. But in relation to post-separation, we don't have, for example, parenting coordination, new ways for families. There are programs that help parents regain their locus of control and try to signpost parents to these intervention programs where they can, you help them to resolve their difficulties themselves. But it might require teamwork, as with parenting coordination programs, for example, which we lack. We have a program for separated parents. It was useful. Some of the fathers in my study attended it, and they said it helped to a degree. But obviously, it didn't help them bridge the difference with the ex. So, and I'm not saying that there is a panacea or that these programs will help all couples. There will always be unbridgeable differences, unfortunately, where they have to end up on the lap of the judiciary, so to speak. But this is something that can help. So the two fundamental building blocks are the relational and the normative, and these are the last two slides. So in relation to the normative, Steinem tells us women are not going to be equal outside the home unless men are equal in it. And this is what I meant by myopic policies in terms of our social policy is very heavily focused, and it should be, on mothers and the public sphere, employment rates for women, childcare. And that's good. I'm not saying we shouldn't do any of it, but there hasn't been the same heavy focus on helping the fathers in the home. So paternity leave for fathers is still very low, 10 days, and then they have to take 2 months, I think, sick rate pay and 2 months unpaid. I was not the first one to critique this, so there were 9 NGOs who wrote to the government. Gender mainstreaming policies, we're still in infancy, we lack gender audits, things like, coercing companies and the state to publish reports on pay gaps, on uptake by men as well, not just women, of family-friendly policies. So there's a lot of those that we still have to push forward. And education on shared parental responsibility for young people, because their PSCD curriculum is very much focused on the individual. It's okay, identity, sexuality, those things are important, but there's no framework for financial management in a team of 2, in a partnership, and caring responsibility. And I'm saying this because these are the fundamentals to prevent. Yesterday in one of the workshops, I think it was the Estonian delegate who mentioned prevention. So we know from research by Elena Moore that shared parenting is more likely if there's egalitarianism before they split up. So these are things that the state can do to lay the groundwork for couples to society to become much more gender egalitarian, and therefore, obviously, that will increase by focusing, for example, on the gender pay gap, reduce the need for maintenance monies, increase fathers' ethic of care and mothers' faith in fathers' ethics of care. And sort of these are what should be seen as the long-term vision for these family law difficulties. And again, there's no panacea, there's no easy quick fix solution, but these are some things that I believe are the things that I believe are the most important. So just acknowledge my funders, thank you, and perhaps time for some questions.
Dr. Casha, 5 minutes for questions
Okay,
and answers.
Okay.
Well done.
Thank you, Ruth.
I know that you are highly regarded even by other professionals. I wanted to ask, I'm curious about how did you recruit the fathers, and were there more dissenting or more consenting?
Yes, that's and others, the majority were recruited online. 2 were recruited through a fathers group, fathers' rights group. The others were recruited through other Facebook groups. They were mostly for single parents groups. So I recruited through that channel. And then obviously there were some that were both amongst consenting and dissenting pairs that were snowball. So I don't remember the exact numbers, but that's chiefly the pathways.
Thank you for your presentation. If I may, I want to talk in Maltese, please.
Yes.
Naħseb dal-istudju importanti għax jagħti importanza lil parenthood li jagħmlu l-irġiel u naħseb kif għadt inti f'Malta għadna ma nagħtux importanza għal dawn l-affarijiet. Yes, if you want.
He said it's a very important study because it gives importance to what? Sorry, I forgot now.
To the importance of parenthood by fathers.
By fathers, okay.
Sorry,
I back to
your
the
name?
Stephen Camilleri. I'm an
Okay.
education officer for PSCD.
Okay.
So I beg to differ on your last point about the PSCD syllabus.
Okay.
Because we talk about different roles that children, even when they become parents, should take. But you have to understand as well that now we have a multicultural society.
Yes.
So we are getting children that from home already have this mentality that the father is the breadwinner,
Yes.
that the father, what he says, goes in the
Holds.
home. And you mentioned financial literacy. There are other subjects that tackle financial literacy. And also they are having difficulties and parents complaining because they are teaching girls that they need, for example, how to open a bank account. And in Muslim religion, this is not allowed. So we are having these also clashes
Yes.
of culture, of values, of ideas.
Yes.
So it would be interesting, maybe this study, if
Yes.
it would be carried with people who are different from Maltese or whatever.
Yes, yes. I think okay, so there are two important points. So thank you very much for sharing, Stephen.
Welcome.
I think in relation to culture, it's a very important point. I mean, the fathers in my study were Maltese or European. So that's interesting. That's as the other
And
studies.
may I ask what type of level of education that they have as well? Because I think that makes a difference as well,
Yes, it was varied. It was across the board. So I had fathers with a PhD. I had managers, professionals, and then I had fathers who had semi-skilled jobs. So it was a range of professional occupations.
Thanks, Claire, for the excellent presentation. This kind of presentation helps me to also confirm the need for better judgments when we are discerning about custody. However, the level of information that you gathered through obviously these interviews with these parents, they seem to me out of reach for a judge to actually decide, having this level and amount and precision of information about how the couple used to manage. For example, it's easier for a judge to decide on equal custody if the parents were equally participating in the upbringing of the children. But it seems like the level of knowledge that the judge needs to have for them to do an informed decision to this level is beyond or not ingrained, at least in the judicial process. So it's very hard to have this amount of information on which to base the correct decision.
Thank you, Mike. Mike was a former colleague of mine at sedqa. Thank you for that. I'll also return to you, Stephen, because I didn't answer you about financial literacy. Okay. So yes, you are right, and in some ways, first of all, there has been progress. Positive Parenting Malta has entrusted me to deliver training to judges on shared parenting, and my colleague Roberta Farrugia de Bono, she did that on parental alienation, to helping professionals as well, and to. But it was also contingent on their choice to attend or not. That's something else we can think of. I mean, I think it should be compulsory, for example, for mediators, for family lawyers. That's one thing. The other thing is judges' awareness and training and so on is very important. But equally important is having a team, as they do in other countries and with the law reforms now, a board of helping professionals who should also, however, have a high level of training on parental alienation, domestic violence, and this kind of shared parenting. And they would help the judge to make an informed decision. So obviously the judge is mostly entrusted with the technical and the legal facts of the case, but they would be briefed by this board. What I don't agree with is the recent reforms, because they mentioned this board of professionals. I think it should be done in tandem with the judge, not before the judge, for a number of reasons. Because I think it should be the judge still, although studies are critical of the judiciary, it should still be the judge entrusted when there are these huge conflicts with making the final decision. Because if the board makes it, and then is the judge just going to rubber stamp it? Is he going to take a different decision? And then it might be appealed again, and the family goes through different upheavals. So I think that it should be the judge, helped by, and we increase the judiciary if need be, because there's a problem of resources, helped by this board. And also, I mean, abroad, even interviewing children is not carried out by child advocates. Not that I think the child advocate has a very important role. But they are interviewed by psychologists with further specialized training in how to interview children. So it should be sort of top-notch professionals in terms of training and expertise, helping the judge to make these decisions. I think the burden on the judges is understandably too heavy, and it's not their cake to eat, sort of. It's not. I mean, even abroad, they have professionals to help them to take that decision. And in relation to Stephen, on financial literacy, I meant, because I think it would help me to have an updated version of the curriculum. But I was talking about rather sophisticated exercises with children, where they teach them, for example, do they pool their money together? Do they have 2 separate accounts and then pool some in? Or what ramification? At secondary school.
Yes, they are all done.
I mean, the last look I had that
The problem is always the time, and I believe it shouldn't be just one subject
No.
that talks about such issues.
No.
And there are other subjects like
Home economics.
and ethics
Yes.
and religion.
That are also important, yes.
Cross-curricular thing, because sometimes we pretend that ESCD is the savior of
No, we're not.
and it cannot be like that.
No, I talked about a multi-pronged approach. So, but obviously, if you don't prepare young children as they are coming to adolescence and starting to date and form relationships and perhaps have children at 15 or 16, although it's not typical, but then they have to be prepared. It's useless when the milk is spilled, to try and.
Last question, Claire.
Yes.
Yes, it's time. No, I just wanted to comment about the richness of your interviews. It shows your clinical background, that sedqa working with families came out.
Thank you.
And I was very impressed by the self-reflexivity of your interviewees.
Yes.
I mean, these are the kind of people we need in court to support
Yes.
the judiciary and to support first and foremost children and families.
Yes.
Well
yes.
done.
Yes. Thank you very much. Thank you.